Have you ever just said yes to something, almost automatically, before your brain really caught up?
Oh, definitely. It happens way more than you might realize.
And understanding why that happens, well, that's pretty key to navigating the world today, isn't it?
Absolutely. So today we're diving into, the science behind it, the psychology of influence.
Looking at those powerful psychological triggers that can just lead us straight to saying yes, automatic compliance.
And actually, before we jump right in, we wanted to mention a great resource we came across.
Oh, yeah.
It's a YouTube channel called Mindful Moments. They do these really interesting AI-powered analyses of books.
AI-powered, okay.
Yeah, and the goal is to prompt reflection, encourage that critical thinking, which is something, we really value here too.
That sounds right up our alley. Definitely worth checking out.
For sure.
So our goal today, then, is to unpack some of these core ideas about influence. We'll draw on the research and see how they actually play out, in your everyday life.
Right. The aim is really to give you some insights, help you become a bit more, let's say, discerning.
A more informed decision maker, without getting totally bogged down in theory.
Exactly. So should we get started?
Let's do it. Where do we begin?
Well, let's start with this idea of automaticity, this sort of click-run pattern.
Click-run.
Yeah, like a trigger happens, that's the click, and then this automatic behavior just runs off. Often without much conscious thought.
Okay, I think I get that, like a reflex.
Kind of. Think about animals. Ethologists, the scientists who study animal behavior, they found this thing with mother turkeys.
Turkeys, okay.
Yeah, so a mother turkey, she'll care for anything that makes that classic cheep-cheep sound. Even if it's like a stuffed polecat with a recorder inside.
Serious.
Seriously. But if her own chick doesn't make that sound, she might ignore it. Or even attack it.
Wow. So it's just that one sound triggering the whole mothering sequence.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of what they call a fixed action pattern. Very rigid.
Right. And you're saying humans have something similar. Maybe not that rigid, but...
Well, yeah. Our behavior is definitely more flexible, more complex. But we absolutely have our own ingrained patterns, certain cues, certain situations. They can trigger pretty predictable responses in us. Often below the level of awareness.
And I guess in today's world, with everything moving so fast, so much information coming at us, we probably rely on these mental shortcuts, these automatic responses even more, right? It feels necessary just to cope.
That's a really critical point. I think it was Alfred North Whitehead who said something like, civilization advances by extending the number of operations we can perform without thinking about them.
Huh. So automaticity can be efficient, useful even.
It absolutely can be, but it also makes us vulnerable, right? It opens the door for these principles of influence to work.
Which means understanding them is becoming, pretty crucial for us as individuals and maybe even for society.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's look at one of these principles. There's a great story about an antique jewelry store owner.
Oh, I think I know this one. The necklace.
That's the one. A guy comes in, wants something nice for his fiancée. The jeweler has this turquoise necklace, good quality, priced at $500. He offers it for $250 half price.
And the guy was initially pleased, right? But
then he hesitated. The lower price made him doubt it. He wanted something really nice, and maybe $250 felt too cheap. He almost walked away.
It perfectly shows that expensive equal good shortcut, that heuristic.
Heuristic meaning like a mental rule of thumb.
Exactly. Our brains often just make that leap. Higher price means higher quality. It's a quick way to judge, but not always accurate.
And it's not just about perception, is it?
Yeah.
Didn't they do a study with an energy drink?
They did. Volunteers were given an energy drink meant to boost mental performance. Some paid full price, others got it at a discount. The ones who got the discount, they actually solved fewer mental puzzles than the full price group.
Wow. So the lower price somehow subconsciously signaled it wouldn't work as well.
It seems so. Our brains can link price and effectiveness even when there's no logical reason. It's a shortcut that, while sometimes helpful, can definitely be used to influence us.
Okay, that's fascinating. What's next?
Let's talk about reciprocity. The rule of reciprocity.
The old, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours idea.
Pretty much. But it runs deeper. It's a really powerful social norm. This feeling of obligation we have to give back when someone gives us something.
Yeah, you feel indebted somehow.
Exactly. And societies really benefit from this rule, right? It fosters cooperation, trust, mutually beneficial exchanges. We're trained from childhood. Share your toys, say thank you, return favors.
And there's a social cost if you don't.
Right.
People don't like takers or freeloaders.
Not at all. We generally go to great lengths to avoid being seen that way. There was a reader's report, I think, an employee for the state of Oregon.
Oh, yeah, her boss was incredibly generous, always giving gifts to her and her son.
Right. And even though she was maxed out salary-wise in her job, no chance for promotion, she felt stuck.
Because she felt so obligated by all the gifts. Couldn't bring herself to look for another job.
Precisely. It shows the power isn't just in returning favors, but in the obligation to receive them in the first place, even unsolicited ones.
That makes the rule easy to exploit then.
Very easy. Think about the classic Regan study.
The Coke experiment.
That's the one. Some participants were unexpectedly given a Coke by the researcher's assistant. Later, that same assistant asked them to buy raffle tickets.
And the ones who got the free Coke bought more tickets.
Significantly more. Way more than those who didn't get a Coke. The unsolicited small favor created this sense of obligation.
And the tricky part is, the person giving the favor often gets to choose both the initial favor and what they want in return.
Exactly. There's an asymmetry there, which leads us to techniques like rejection then retreat.
Okay, what's that?
It's where someone makes a big request first, one they probably expect you to refuse.
Okay.
Then, after you say no, they retreat to a smaller request, the one they actually wanted all along.
Ah, so because they made a concession, coming down from the big request?
You feel obligated to make a concession too by agreeing to the smaller one?
Clever. And maybe you even feel kind of responsible for the final deal, like you helped shape it.
Research shows exactly that. People feel more satisfied with the outcome and more responsible for it, which, interestingly, makes them more likely to agree to future requests from that person too.
So, faced with all this, how do we defend ourselves?
Yeah.
How do we avoid getting manipulated by reciprocity?
Well, the key isn't to reject all favors. It's about understanding the intent.
Okay.
If someone offers you something, ask yourself, is this a genuine act of kindness? A true favor? If yes, then absolutely reciprocate fairly. That's how the rule is supposed to work.
Boy.
But if that initial favor feels like, well, a setup, a compliance tactic designed purely to get you to agree to something bigger later.
Then you recognize it for what it is.
Exactly. You mentally redefine it. It's not a gift. It's a sales tactic or a manipulation attempt. Once you see it that way, the feeling of obligation tends to just disappear. You don't need to reciprocate a trick.
That makes sense. Like that example of the Home Fire Safety Association.
Right. They offer a free extinguisher or a free home inspection. Seems generous.
But then comes the hard sell for their expensive alarm system.
So if you redefine that initial freebie not as a gift, but as a sales device...
Then you don't feel bad saying no thanks to the alarm system you don't want or need.
Precisely. You've sidestepped the reciprocity trap.
It reminds me a bit of, Tupperware parties.
Oh, a classic example. Friendship power mixed with reciprocity.
You go because your friend invited you. Maybe you like the friend.
And then you feel kind of obligated to buy something, even if you don't really need it, just because you went to the trouble of hosting.
Yeah. That combination must be why they stuck with the party model for so long, even when retail might have seemed more efficient.
Absolutely. That blend of liking and reciprocity is incredibly potent, which actually brings us nicely to the next principle.
Which is?
Liking. Plain and simple.
We prefer to say yes to people we know and like. Seems pretty straightforward.
It does, doesn't it? Seems obvious. But it's used strategically all the time.
Like salespeople, for instance.
Definitely. Think about that Shackley endless chain method.
Remind me.
The salesperson gets a customer to buy, then asks for names of friends who might also be interested. Then they go to the friend saying, so-and-so suggested I call you.
Ah, so it leverages the existing friendship. The friend's name opens the door and creates instant liking, or at least trust.
Exactly. And stats show recommendations from friends have this incredibly high trust rate, something like 92%. It's hugely effective.
Makes sense. What else falls under liking?
Well, there's physical attractiveness. Like it or not, we tend to unconsciously assign good qualities like talent, kindness, intelligence to good-looking people.
The halo effect.
That's it. So compliance pros, people trying to influence us, they often take care to look their best. It gives them an edge.
Okay. What about similarity?
Hugely important. We like people who are like us. Similar opinions, personality traits, background, even lifestyle.
Even small things.
Oh, yeah. Research shows even trivial similarities can increase liking and compliance. That's why influence training often tells people to subtly mirror their target's posture or mood or speech style.
Mirroring, like copying them.
Subtly, yeah. And studies show it works. Food servers who mimic customers get bigger tips. Salespeople sell more. Negotiators get better outcomes.
Even in speed dating.
Yep. Mimicry increased perceived attractiveness in speed dating studies, too. It creates this unconscious feeling of rapport.
Wild. What about compliments?
Yeah.
Flattery?
Also effective. We tend to just gobble up praise. There was even a study where people got positive feedback from a computer.
From a computer.
Yeah, comments like, "You seem to have an uncommon ability to structure data logically," even knowing it was just programmed feedback.
Let me guess. They still felt better about the computer and themselves.
You got it. We seem to have this automatic positive reaction to compliments, even when they might not be entirely sincere.
Though I imagine honest praise probably works even better in the long run for building real liking.
Oh, almost certainly. Genuine connection is always going to be more powerful. Which leads to another point. Contact alone isn't enough.
Meaning, just being around someone doesn't guarantee you'll like them.
Right. Think about the Sharif summer camp experiment. 2 groups of boys, initially kept separate, then brought together. They developed intense rivalry, hostility even.
So just putting them together didn't help.
Not at all. It actually made things worse initially. What did work was forcing them to cooperate.
How?
The researchers created problems that affected both groups, things they had to work together to solve, like fixing the camp's water supply truck when it broke down, or pooling money to rent a movie they all wanted to see.
Ah, so shared goals requiring cooperation. That bridged the gap.
Exactly. It turned rivals into allies. It shows the nature of the contact matters. Negative experiences, competition, threats, those can increase hostility. Cooperative, team-oriented situations build liking. This has big implications for things like school desegregation, for example.
You need genuine cooperation, not just proximity.
Precisely. Okay, one more aspect of liking. Association.
Association.
We like or dislike things simply because they get associated with positive or negative stuff. Think about how a TV weather reporter gets blamed for bad weather.
Huh. Yeah, even though they have no control over it.
Right. Or conversely, how people love to associate themselves with winners, wearing the local team's jersey after they win a big game.
Basking in the reflected glory.
That's the term. We try to link ourselves to positive things and distance ourselves from negative ones, like parents warning kids not to play with bad kids, guilt by association.
Okay, so association is powerful too. Given all these ways liking can be used, attractiveness, similarity, compliments, association, how do we defend against it?
The main defense is awareness. Pay attention to how you're feeling about the person trying to influence you.
If you find yourself liking them really quickly, or maybe more than you'd expect.
Exactly. That's your cue to pause. Step back mentally and separate the person from the offer or the request. Ask yourself, setting aside how much I like this person, is this actually a good deal? Is this something I really want or need?
Focus on the merits of the thing itself, not just the person selling it.
Precisely. It short-circuits that automatic, like them, agree with them response.
Got it. Okay, where do we go next?
Let's move on to another big one, social proof.
Social proof. This is the idea that we look to others to figure out how to behave.
Exactly. Especially when we're uncertain or the situation is ambiguous. We assume that if lots of other people are doing something, it must be the right thing to do.
Like seeing a long line outside a restaurant and thinking, wow, that place must be good.
Perfect example. Or the story of the restaurant manager who had a dish that wasn't selling well.
What did he do?
He just changed the menu description to label it our most popular item. And guess what?
It became popular.
Instantly. People saw the label, assumed others liked it, and decided to try it themselves. Social proof in action.
It can be quite powerful. There's that fascinating case study of the religious cult.
Oh, the doomsday cult whose prophecy failed.
Yeah, they predicted a massive flood would destroy the world on a specific date. But obviously, it didn't happen.
So you'd expect them to abandon their beliefs, right? But instead...
They became more fervent, they doubled down, started trying desperately to recruit new members.
Why? Because the physical proof failed them. The flood didn't come, so their only way to feel validated, to reduce that agonizing uncertainty, was to get social proof. If they could convince others, maybe they weren't crazy after all.
That really shows the need for validation, especially when things are uncertain.
It does. And that uncertainty aspect is key. It can also lead to negative outcomes, like the bystander effect.
Pluralistic ignorance, right? Where everyone in an emergency looks to everyone else.
And because nobody else seems concerned or is taking action because they're all looking for cues, everyone assumes it must not be a real emergency.
So potentially, no one helps, even if someone is clearly in trouble.
Tragically, yes. That's why the advice in an emergency is crucial.
Don't just shout help. point someone out.
Exactly. Reduce the uncertainty. Point to a specific person. You, in the blue shirt, call 911. Make it clear who is responsible and what needs to be done. That snaps people out of that passive looking around state.
Okay, that's vital advice.
Yeah.
What about positive uses of social proof?
Well, think about encouraging pro-social behaviors. There was a study on reducing home energy consumption.
How do they try to persuade people?
They tested different messages. One focused on environmental protection, another on social responsibility, a third on saving money, and a fourth simply said,
Let me guess. Something about neighbors.
you got it. It basically said most of your fellow residents are trying to conserve energy.
And that was the most effective message.
By a significant margin. More effective than saving money or saving the planet. Just knowing that others were doing it was the biggest motivator.
That's powerful. And it connects back to what we were saying about resources like Mindful Moments and, well, our podcasts here too. They encourage you to think critically about the information and social cues you receive.
Right, to question whether you're acting based on genuine conviction or just following the herd, so to speak.
But there's a potential pitfall with using social proof, isn't there? Something about highlighting negative behavior.
Yes, the social proof big mistake. Sometimes, in an effort to discourage a bad behavior like littering or binge drinking among students' campaigns, we'll emphasize how many people are doing it.
Trying to show it's a serious problem.
Exactly. But what they inadvertently do is normalize the behavior. They send the message, look, lots of people are doing this undesirable thing, which ironically can make others more likely to do it.
Because it provides social proof for the bad behavior.
Oops. Big oops. So a better approach is often to focus on the desired behavior, even if it's not yet the majority.
How so?
You can leverage future social proof. Honestly, describe how support for the positive action is growing. More and more residents are choosing to recycle. That frames the desired behavior as the emerging norm.
Focus on the trend, not just the current state. Clever.
It can be much more effective.
Okay, this has been a lot to take in. We've covered quite a few principles.
We have. We've touched on that automatic click-run tendency.
Right, and the power of reciprocity that need to give back.
Then the principle of liking how we're swayed by people we feel connected to through similarity, compliments, or association.
And just now, social proof looking to others to guide our actions, especially when we're unsure.
And understanding these, recognizing how they work, it really does empower you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it helps you navigate things more thoughtfully, maybe spot when these influences are being used on you, and resist if you want to.
Exactly. Become a more conscious decision maker.
So here's something for you listening to think about. Cast your mind back. The last time you said yes, really quickly, maybe without much thought, what might have been the underlying influence at play there? Was it reciprocity? Liking? Social proof? Something else?
That's a great question to ponder. And if you found this exploration useful, please do subscribe so you don't miss future discussions.
Yeah, and share it with someone else who you think might find it interesting or helpful.
And if you want to go deeper into the source material we discussed today, you can usually find links to purchase it in the show notes. Supporting the original authors is always great.
Absolutely. But most importantly, just keep thinking critically. Keep questioning the forces that are trying to shape your choices every day.
Well said. Until next time.
Thanks for tuning in.